Welcome to lesson number 3 on ancient Egypt. This time we're actually going to be getting into, I should say, the heart of the history, although this is still more of an overview than anything else, but I'll try to give you a little bit more in-depth knowledge here. So what you're looking at right now, if you notice in your note packet, you have a section on Old Kingdom, then the next page will say Middle Kingdom, the next page will New Kingdom. If you would, write down what you see here, is because these are basic summaries of what each era is about. I should explain that as well. When it says Old Kingdom, Middle Kingdom, New Kingdom, it's not, if it helps out better, it's like saying old time period, the oldest time period, this is the middle time period, and this is the new time period. You know, again, ancient Egypt spans, its dominance basically spans across almost 2,000 years, but that almost 2,000 years is divided into these three time periods. We just call them Old Kingdom, Middle Kingdom, and New Kingdom. And I give you at least the basic dates behind them. Of course, you could read books on ancient Egypt, and they'll throw little dates here and there, a little bit off. Everybody's always a little bit off on their dates, but here's the basic dates you need. Again, I'm not testing you on dates, but it just helps you kind of plot out in your mind about what's going on. You can even compare them a little bit to the dates I gave you from our unit on Mesopotamia, and kind of compare where Egypt's at versus where Mesopotamia was at. So, but here's the basic overview of each one. I'm going to go much more into each one here, each one of these kingdoms. I wouldn't say much more, but more than what you see here. But the basic idea of the Old Kingdom era is that it just seemed like a good time to be in Egypt. You didn't really have many threats from outside. Everything was fairly safe and peaceful. But in the very end, it did turn into where, well, they didn't end because of a threat from outside. The Old Kingdom era came to a crashing end because of a civil war, a very long civil war. Once the dust kind of settles, you get the Middle Kingdom era, and that is known mainly because it's a time of regional and interregional trade, especially with outside peoples. This is where the Egyptians really get to know, say, the Mesopotamians. They didn't really have as much contact with the outside world during the Old Kingdom era, but the Middle Kingdom era, yeah, a lot more contact. Trade relations set up and things like that. Even the Minoan Greeks, or the ancient Greeks known as Minoans, become, well, they're just there. They're there all the time. They're coming in and out on their ships and things like that. And it's about that time, about 2000 BC, when this area of the ancient world, basically the Middle East and the Mediterranean, just really start to get to know each other better. And everybody benefits from it. Everybody becomes more wealthy. Everybody has better standards of living. Then also at the same time, everybody knows about everybody else, so when you get, say, groups that just want to go jack someone else, like the Hyksos, well, we'll talk about them when we get to them. Once the Hyksos reign of Egypt goes by, though, you get into what's called the New Kingdom era, or the New Kingdom. And this is where Egypt attains its highest level of power. Most of the, I shouldn't say most, a lot of the stories we have about ancient Egypt, most of them are referring to this time period. When we think of Egypt as just this dominant power, unstoppable, they're definitely are at the top of their game type thing. So, anyways, we'll go through each one of these a little bit more specifically in future lessons. In this lesson, I'll be focusing a bit on just the Old Kingdom, just the basics at least. So, with the Old Kingdom, first thing I want to talk about is how, well, in the last lesson or the lesson before that, we talked about Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt, how peoples just kind of came together, they settled along, again, just the naturally growing food around the Nile River Valley and the Nile River Delta. But over time, as they fight or merge together, they form into two major kingdoms, which are the Kingdom of Lower Egypt, which is in the north by the Delta, and the Kingdom of Upper Egypt, which is the river valley towards the bottom. Again, if you're looking at this is Lower Egypt, this is Upper Egypt. Okay. Finally comes down to the point where, Upper Egypt conquers Lower Egypt. For what reason, I personally am not sure. I imagine there's a lot of hypotheses and theories out there. Maybe we actually know. I just don't know myself, and I apologize for that. But the guy that leads the armies of Upper Egypt is a guy named Narmer. Now, the one thing we do know is that Lower Egypt was in a more powerful position. They have more food, therefore they have more people. And usually when you have more people, you're more powerful. So most likely, in this case, Narmer felt himself to be the underdog. Most likely it was a bit more driven, and who knows, maybe one of the reasons, again, this is just me speculating a bit, maybe one of the reasons why he attacks Lower Egypt is a lot of the reasons why the Akkadians attacked the Sumerians. Like, you've always treated us poorly, you always looked down upon us, you wouldn't let us come in and really just be part of you, you just always thought we were not worth your time type thing. Now we're going to get you. So it could have been like that. I mean, I could be very wrong on that one, but I wouldn't be surprised. So Narmer is able to conquer Lower Egypt. Probably shouldn't have. Lower Egypt definitely had the potential to be way more powerful. But that brings in this whole idea that maybe they just thought they'd win and just kind of came into it with an entitled sense of we're just better than you. Again, I'm off my own speculation, but there's a lot of things in history that go along with that. And I mean a lot of examples in history that go along with that idea. So I'm just saying it's not coming out of nowhere. It's just the idea that is a common theme we see throughout history. So now, when Narmer starts off, though, he starts Egypt's first, or Narmer conquers Lower Egypt and unites the two Egypts into one Egypt, and this is the beginning of a one Egypt. We get also Egypt's first dynasty. Now, this is the vocab word you do need to know. If you have not heard the word dynasties before, although I imagine you have, that's a word that floats around our society a lot. But what you need to write in your notes is the definition of a dynasty is a period of time where one family is in charge. That is the basic idea of what a dynasty is. Although, right now I'm just going to step aside from Egypt and just explain a little bit about our society. We use this term a lot even in our society. Like I often hear in baseball, the Yankees dynasty, football, the Patriots dynasty, in basketball, the Lakers dynasty. The reason why we say things like that for sports is these are sports teams that have done quite well over decades of time, where they always seem to be the teams that are in the playoffs, if not in the championship or winning the championship. It doesn't mean they always win, but they're always just one of those teams that, I mean, if they have a losing season, it's just like, what's going on here? Anyways, basically what we did is we took the term dynasty, this idea where one group is powerful over time or in charge for over time, and we apply it to sports that way. It doesn't mean that they're in charge, but it does make sense. We do that quite often, where when there's something just that's kind of dominant, has been so for quite a while, we call that a dynasty. So, but for the purpose of this class, and especially when you get things like China, you do need to know what the term dynasty means. A period of time where one family is in charge. Okay. Moving on. Now, just going to leave that up there for a second. As far as we know, the first type of government we see in human history is what's called a theocracy, where the government is ruled by religion. I hope that is just feeling like, well, yeah, of course it's that way, because of what we talked about in our last unit with the characteristics of civilization, that we'll always have an organized government to provide peace and order, and we'll always have religion or a belief system in place that establishes what is supposed to be right and what is supposed to be wrong. And therefore, religion and government is always going to be connected in that way. So it just makes sense that the first government ever would be what's called a theocracy, where the government is ruled by religion. And simply it's just saying this, is that your religious leader is also your political leader. There's very few theocracies left in the world today. Probably the best example of one would be like Vatican City. It's actually about a 1 square mile country in the center of Rome, Italy, but it's its own country. And it's a country that the Catholic Church is in charge of, and the head of the Catholic Church is the Pope. So therefore, Vatican City is one of the world's last theocracies still in place. So, but in the beginning of human history, almost every government was theocratic, where it just made sense that the person who was in charge of your belief system, that was like chosen by the gods or whatever. And a lot of times leaders would say that they were a god, like in Egypt, you get the idea of Pharaoh. I am the reincarnation of the god Horus. But they'd also be your political leader. And it just seems, well, yeah, it should be that way. And when you have just one belief system, and you have one person in charge of basically saying what is right and wrong for that belief system, well, then it makes sense that that same person should dole out punishments and judgments based off of what is right and wrong. So therefore, it just seems easy to have your religious leader and your political leader be the same person. But that is what's called a theocracy. Now, the next thing I want to talk about Oh, I should have had that up earlier. I'm sorry. Priests held immense power and influence. Yeah, most definitely. Your political leader / religious leader is always going to have other people to help him out, and he's usually going to choose other religious people to help him out, often priests. So, this next part I'd like to point out, it's more fun. You actually don't need to get this part in your notes. At least I don't think I'm going to quiz on this one. But the pharaonic crown. If you look at the top, you see one guy with the crown looks like a bowling pin. The other guy with the crown, it's red. I don't know how to describe that. Just not a bowling pin. The red, not bowling pin. And then the guy on the very right, they're both put together. Well, that's what Narmer did. When he conquered Lower Egypt, he took the crown of Upper Egypt, which looks like the bowling pin, combined it with the crown of Lower Egypt, which is the red cap, and then he put them together just to show what is the pharaonic crown. And I like putting the picture on the bottom just because I grew up watching this movie. They showed it every Thanksgiving until football took over. A movie called The Ten Commandments, but it was where they really tried to show a lot of recreate ancient Egypt in a film setting. They really took that on a huge task there, I guess you could say, and did a pretty good job for the time it came out. A lot of people like to down it and say they didn't get this right, they didn't get that right, but I'll give them props for doing the best they could. But that is one of the things they put in there, where the Pharaoh, played by Yul Brynner there, Pharaoh Ramses, is wearing that pharaonic crown. So it was a symbol of power, and later on became a symbol of I am your God. Essentially, worship me. And that same crown was actually sought after by those that conquered Egypt. Whoever conquered Egypt later on throughout its history would wear that crown, basically saying, I am your God King. Not just your king, I am your God King. So, moving on. This is the last thing we're going to talk about, at least in this lesson. And that's just the simple idea that life was just good during the Old Kingdom time period, the Old Kingdom era here. Again, like I said before, there weren't many things that threatened them, outside threats. And I mean, probably the worst thing ever would just be more of natural threats, like the river wouldn't flood enough. Although, oddly enough, again, from what I've read, apparently the Egyptians say, at least in the records that have been read, and off of what I've read off of other people saying, that the river actually flooded quite regularly at the right amount, which is kind of, I would say that earth scientists would just be like, and geologists and whatnot would be like, that doesn't work that way, like you never have a river just flood the same way for 1,000 years or so, with only a couple deviants here and there. But that's what the Egyptians claim apparently. And man, if things are just that nice, where they seem that safe, food is always going to be there, you're not too worried, then yeah, you're going to have a good life. But there's also that goes into that too. It's just also how you treat others around you. And there's some things I'm going to show here in a second that go into maybe showing a little bit of this mentality that early Egypt had, that went into the idea of how they were able to last a little bit longer, or not fall into the massive civil war earlier than they do, because they do fall into a civil war, which means they had problems. But they do last a few hundred years, a good 500 years about, before they really fall into that. And that's a long period to last, especially when the only real enemy out there is yourself. They're able to keep away from that mega strife. Anyways, but that brings into this idea of the age of the pyramids. But before we get to the pyramids, which I'm going to do I got ahead of myself there. It's during this time period that they have the ability to build pyramids and things like that. So the Old Kingdom area is when they build the pyramids. They don't in the Middle Kingdom era or the New Kingdom era. What I'm showing you here are statues that, from my understanding, date to the Old Kingdom time period. The statue on the left is of a king named Sneferu. I hope I'm saying that right. But the thing I'd like to just mention or point out about this is, well, I'll put it this way. Usually when you make a statue of yourself, which we believe he made the statue of himself, you're more egotistical with it, meaning you show yourself. You don't really have anybody else there. Even when we make statues of other people that we feel ingratiated to, like in our country, say like an Abraham Lincoln or George Washington or Martin Luther King Jr., we'll just make it of that person. Thank you for doing what you did for our country, or thank you for what you did and just making life better. Snefru, though, has his son next to him. And the implications are a bit clear. This is essentially saying, well, I want to be remembered, like we've talked about. The whole theme of this unit is the idea of being remembered, but I want to be remembered, not just the idea that I am me, but remembered by my dynasty, that I will be immortal. And I'll be remembered in this life and in the afterlife, but I'll also be remembered in this life in a physical nature, because my descendants will be the rulers of this kingdom, assuming they don't get overthrown. But that is interesting. He is showing that his idea of power or who he is isn't just because of him, but it's because of his family, and that he'll be remembered and be able to keep that because of basically his descendants. It's just interesting. Now the picture on the right I like to show, again, just to say that, hey, they liked building big stuff. You see the kid next to it, and you can tell it's a big statue. But this one, pointing out, it's kind of deviating from what we're talking about and just kind of showing this nature of the Old Kingdom thought process, or how we think they did so well for 500 years. Well, actually, I forgot to mention why we think, like Snefru, yeah, he probably was a bit egotistical, and most likely was, if you kind of read up on also what he did with his pyramids. But he also had this sense of, I can't do it alone. It's not as selfish as a really egotistical person we usually think is. Anyways, that being said, going on to the statue on the right-hand side there, that is of the god Osiris. And the dead giveaway is what he's holding in his hands. Those what are called ankhs, or ankh of life. That symbol's everywhere in our society today. I like taking the example to point this out just because I have the picture there. But if you're someone like me, I've played a lot of board games, video games, or read a lot of books, and most all the time when you see a symbol that represents healing or resurrection, that's usually the symbol that is used. But it's a symbol from the god Osiris, because he died, was put together, essentially reborn, and then became the god of the dead. There's a whole story that goes into that with Egyptian mythology. I'm not going to take the time to go into right now, because I feel like we're going a little bit long. We're going long already, and I'm sorry this is taking a bit. But just two more statues to look at, and these are a bit more interesting. The statue on the left is actually small. It's just small. It's bigger than that, but kind of like that big, but smaller than every other thing we've looked at so far with ancient Egypt. And that was found by the sarcophagus of one of the last kings, actually. He's the last king of the Old Kingdom of Egypt, a guy named Pepi II. And this is another interesting thing where basically he's showing himself as a kid with his mom, saying, and again, this is one of those clear things, saying, I really liked my mom. I honor my mom. Basically who I am is because of her. And again, we don't see that from tons of egotistical people. Then combine that with a statue you see off to the right, and that is the King Menekare, the guy who builds the third largest pyramid of all the pyramids that are built. And he has his wife next to him. Again, we don't see this a lot in history. But he has his wife next to him, and not just the idea that he's next to him like she's an equal, but she is supporting him, basically in the idea of like, I can't be who I am. I couldn't do what I did without my wife. Some people could look at it and say, well, she had that because she manipulated him. And again, there's so many indications throughout the Old Kingdom of Egypt, like the statues I've just shown you, where it's hard to think of it that way. No, most likely he was very, very much appreciative of his wife, just like Pepi is most definitely very, very appreciative of his mother, these people that help out. And again, we don't see this a lot in history, and people have as much power as they did, where there was just nobody and nothing to challenge them. But then to honor people around them, we just don't see that much in history. Yes, we do see it, but man, not a lot. Okay, and I'm just going to end this lesson at this point. Again, this is lesson number 3. And we're going to start lesson number 4 with the pyramids, where we'll just talk about the pyramids.